The cold was a living thing. It gnawed at the skin of her knuckles, turning them a blotchy, painful red. Alara hunched her shoulders, trying to shrink into herself, to offer the wind less of a target. It was a useless gesture. The wind was a master predator in the northern holds, and it always found the weak spots. Her fingers were stiff and clumsy around the rough bristles of the scrub brush. Ice crystals had formed in the coarse fibers, scratching at the flagstones of the great hall's veranda. The stone was a sheet of black ice, unforgiving and slick. Every scrape of the brush sent a jarring vibration up her arm, a dull ache that settled deep in her bones. This was her life. A litany of cold, aches, and the ceaseless feeling of being invisible. They called her the Ghost of Greyfang. An Omega, an orphan, a shadow that flitted through the halls of the pack house, cleaning up messes no one else would touch. She was less than nothing, a constant, quiet reminder of a failure. Her parents had been part of a failed challenge against the old Alpha years ago, and their punishment had been death. Hers was to live. Sometimes she thought their fate had been the kinder one. A sharp, deliberate kick landed squarely on the wooden bucket beside her. Icy, foul-smelling water sloshed over the side, drenching her thin trousers and soaking her through to the skin. The shock of it was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. "Clumsy thing," a voice sneered, dripping with saccharine contempt. Alara looked up, her gaze traveling from a pair of fine, fur-lined boots to the smug face of Lyra. Lyra was everything Alara was not. She was a beta of high standing, her hair a perfect cascade of silver blonde, her cheeks flushed with health and warmth. Her smile was a cruel, beautiful slash in her perfect face. "You've made a mess, Ghost," Lyra said, nudging the overturned bucket again with her toe. "The Alpha King arrives today for the tithe. We can't have the veranda looking like a pigsty, can we?" Alara gritted her teeth, the sound of faint grinding in the vast, cold silence. The sting of the freezing water was already turning into a deep, burning ache in her legs. She said nothing. Speaking would only make it worse. "What's the matter? Frostbite your tongue?" Another girl, one of Lyra's vapid cronies, giggled. "Or are you just as stupid as you look?" Humiliation was a hot, familiar flush that crept up her neck. She wanted to disappear, to curl into a ball and simply cease to be. But a tiny, stubborn spark inside her refused to be extinguished. It was a miserable little ember, but it was hers. She pushed herself to her knees, the rough fabric of her wet trousers scraping against the icy stone. Pain shot through her, sharp and immediate. Ignoring them, she reached for the bucket, her movements slow and deliberate. "Clean it up," Lyra commanded, her voice sharp as broken glass. "And be quick about it. I need you to fetch me some winter bloom from the whisperwood. My complexion is a disaster in this dry air." Alara's head snapped up. The whisperwood? Now? A storm was brewing on the horizon, a smudge of bruised purple against the gray sky. The elders had been muttering about it all morning, calling it a shadow storm, something unnatural. No one was supposed to leave the safety of the compound. "But the storm," Alara whispered, her voice rough from disuse. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Are you refusing an order, Omega?" The word was a whip crack. "Perhaps you'd prefer a day in the ice cells to reconsider your position." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of her existence. The ice cells were a death sentence. She bowed her head, the curtain of her dark, tangled hair hiding her face. "No, I will go." "Good girl." Lyra patted her head, a condescending, loathsome gesture. "Don't take too long, And try not to get yourself killed. It would be such an inconvenience to find a replacement. Lyra and her friends swept away, their laughter echoing like cruel bells in the frigid air. Alara was left alone with the spreading puddle of filth and the impossible task ahead. She righted the bucket, her movements stiff. For a moment, she just knelt there, shivering, the cold seeping into her marrow. Despair was a heavy cloak, threatening to smother the last of her fight. What was the point? Why keep pushing? Why keep enduring? But then she thought of the ice cells, of the utter, final blackness. The ember inside her flickered. Not yet. She would not let them win. Not today. She finished cleaning the mess, her hands and feet numb stumps at the ends of her limbs. She didn't bother changing her wet clothes. There was no time, and no one would give her a dry set anyway. With a deep, shuddering breath, she slipped out of the compound's back gate, a ghost disappearing into the oppressive gray of the coming storm. The wind hit her with the force of a physical blow the moment she cleared the protective walls of the Grey Fang compound. It howled, a mournful, predatory sound that seemed to claw at her ears. Snow, hard and sharp as sand, flew horizontally, stinging any exposed skin. The sky was no longer just bruised. It was a churning cauldron of black and violent purple. The elders were right. This was no natural storm. The Whisperwood was named for the sound the wind made as it passed through its ancient, frost-covered pines. Today, it was not whispering. It was screaming. Alara pulled her threadbare cloak tighter, a useless gesture against the supernatural cold. Every step was a battle. The snow was already calf-deep, and it fought her, dragging at her legs, trying to pull her down and bury her. Why was she doing this? For a handful of flowers to soothe a bully's vanity? It was absurd. It was a death sentence. A part of her, the logical part, screamed to turn back, to face the ice cells. At least there, the end would be swift. Out here, the cold would take her slowly, piece by agonizing piece. But the stubborn, defiant spark flared. Lyra wanted her gone. The pack wanted her gone. She would not give them the satisfaction. She would find their stupid flowers, and she would walk back into that hall and throw them at Lyra's feet. The thought was so audacious, so unlike her, that it gave her a burst of warmth. It was a fool's hope, but it was hope nonetheless. She pushed deeper into the woods, her eyes scanning the forest floor for the pale, bell-shaped flowers of the winter bloom. They only grew in the most sheltered hollows, near the ancient heart trees. The cold was intensifying, a pressure against her chest. The air smelled wrong, tinged with something metallic and sour, like ozone and decay. The very shadows seemed to writhe, twisting into shapes that were not quite natural. Her foot caught on a hidden root. She cried out, a small, pathetic sound swallowed by the storm's fury as she pitched forward. She landed hard, her face plunging into a drift of snow. For a moment, she just lay there, the fight draining out of her. It would be so easy to close her eyes, so easy to let the snow cover her, to let the cold take her into its final, quiet embrace. No. The word was a silent scream in her mind. She pushed herself up, spitting snow. Her ankle throbbed, a sharp, searing counterpoint to the numbing cold. She tried to put weight on it and cried out again as pain, white-hot and blinding, lanced up her leg. It was broken, or at least badly sprained. Panic, a frantic bird, began to beat its wings in her chest. She was crippled, alone. The storm was growing worse with every passing second. She was going to die here. Tears froze on her cheeks. She crawled, dragging her useless leg behind her, seeking any kind of shelter. Her gloveless hands were raw, bleeding from scraping against ice and rock hidden beneath the snow. She saw a dark opening ahead, a fissure in a massive rock face she hadn't noticed before. A cave. Hope, desperate and raw, surged through her. With the last of her strength, she hauled herself over the threshold, collapsing onto the blessedly dry stone floor just inside. She lay there, panting, her body shaking uncontrollably from cold and exertion. The cave was not warm, but it was shielded from the shrieking wind. The sudden silence was almost as deafening as the storm's rage. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she realized she was not alone. In the back of the cave, a colossal form lay sprawled on the ground. At first, she thought it was a bear, but the fur was the wrong color, a deep sable black shimmering with threads of silver. It was a wolf larger than any she had ever seen, bigger than a pony, its shoulders thick with muscle even in repose. Fear, primal and absolute, seized her. She froze, every muscle tensed. This was a dire wolf, a creature of legend, or something more. The Alpha King's guard were said to be able to shift into such forms. The wolf stirred, and a low groan of pain echoed in the small space. Alara saw the source of its distress. A deep, vicious gash ran along its flank, oozing a substance that was not quite blood. It was black and thick, and it seemed to smoke where it touched the stone, sizzling faintly. The air around the wound was foul with the scent of decay she'd smelled outside. Shadow magic. This wolf was dying. All thoughts of her own predicament vanished, replaced by a strange, overwhelming surge of empathy. She knew what it was to be wounded and alone. She knew the feeling of life slowly, coldly ebbing away. Her fear did not disappear, but it was pushed aside by this new, urgent impulse. She started to crawl toward it. What was she doing? This was madness. The creature could tear her apart with a single snap of its jaws. It was a predator, and she was nothing. Prey. But she couldn't stop herself. Her body moved as if pulled by an invisible string. She reached the wolf's side, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break. The heat rolling off its massive body was a stark contrast to the deathly chill of the wound. Its breathing was shallow, ragged. Up close, the wound was even more horrifying. The black ichor was eating away at the flesh, a creeping corruption. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she reached out. Her small, raw hand, trembling, hovered over the smoking gash. She wanted to help. She wanted to soothe its pain. She touched it. The world exploded in fire and light. A scream was torn from her throat as searing, unimaginable heat shot up her arm. It was not the heat of a flame, but something more fundamental, as if she had touched the heart of a star. A brilliant, golden light erupted from her palm, engulfing the wound, engulfing the wolf, filling the entire cave with its blinding intensity. At the center of the inferno was her hand. She watched in horrified awe as intricate, glowing lines etched themselves onto her skin, burning a path from her wrist to her knuckles. It was a brand of pure light, a complex pattern like a sunburst, impossibly beautiful and excruciatingly painful. The wolf roared, a sound of agony and shock that vibrated through the very stone beneath her. Its massive body convulsed, but through the pain, Alara felt something else. A connection. A sudden, violent snap as if a chain had just locked into place around her soul, tethering her to this creature. She could feel its shock, its pain, its ancient, staggering loneliness. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light vanished. The searing pain in her hand subsided to a fierce, pulsing throb. The cave was plunged back into gloom, the only light the faint, residual glow from the new mark on her skin. The wolf was gone. In its place was a man. He was on one knee, breathing heavily, his head bowed. He was huge, even when kneeling, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the rest of the cave. A cascade of black hair, shot through with silver, fell around a face carved from harsh, beautiful lines. He was naked, his body a tapestry of muscle and old, faded scars. The gash on his side was gone. In its place was smooth, unblemished skin. He slowly lifted his head. Alara's breath caught. She had seen paintings of the gods, but they were pale imitations of the reality before her. His face was one of predatory perfection, all sharp angles and uncompromising strength, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were not the silver of the wolf in pain. They were molten gold, glowing with an inner light ancient and powerful and utterly mesmerizing. His golden gaze fell to her hand, still held out. The sunburst mark now a permanent, intricate tattoo of pale, silvery lines against her skin. A strange, unreadable emotion crossed his face. Awe, disbelief, and something else, something deeper. Recognition. He looked from her hand to her face, his eyes searching hers. The intensity of his stare was a physical force, pinning her in place. He saw her. Not the ghost of Greyfang, not the Omega servant. He saw her. He reached out, his large, calloused hand moving with impossible gentleness, and brushed his fingers against her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a second, softer jolt through the bond that now connected them. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, rough whisper, a rumble that was deep as thunder and soft as velvet. You're her. Alara could only stare, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and terror and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. What was happening? Who was he? He shifted his weight, rising to his full, staggering height. He was a giant, a king of men, radiating an aura of absolute power that made the air itself tremble. He looked down at her, the small, broken thing huddled on the floor of his cave, and his expression softened. Mine, he declared, the word not a question or a claim, but a simple statement of fact, as undeniable as the storm raging outside. I have found you. Ilara flinched back, her mind struggling to process the impossible. The Alpha King. This was Kale, the supreme leader of all the northern packs, the man whose arrival was awaited with such reverence and fear. And he was looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Her body was reacting without her permission. The strange, humming connection between them was a warm current, soothing the icy chill in her veins. Her instincts, the deep animal part of her that had been suppressed for years, were screaming a single, joyous word. Mate. But her mind, conditioned by years of abuse and self-loathing, rebelled. This was a mistake. A cruel joke. He couldn't mean her. She was worthless, invisible, a ghost. No, she whispered, the word barely audible. You're mistaken. A faint smile touched his lips, a breathtaking sight that was like watching a sunrise after a long, dark night. I have waited for you for 500 years, he said, his golden eyes unwavering. I am not mistaken. He took a step toward her. She scrambled back, pain flaring in her ankle, and her own weakness felt like a fresh humiliation. She was a broken toy. He was a king. I can't, she stammered, tears of confusion and fear blurring her vision. I'm no one. You are everything, he countered softly. He knelt before her again, bringing himself to her level. He gestured to the glowing mark on her hand. This is the mark of the soul bond. It only appears when a king finds his queen, when two halves of a soul are reunited. He paused, his gaze filled with a tenderness that shattered her defenses. You healed me. Your light burned away the shadow poison. Her power? That burst of light had come from her? What was happening to her? She was just Alara, just the ghost. Before she could voice her chaotic thoughts, a flicker of movement at the cave's entrance caught her eye. A figure, cloaked and hooded, stood silhouetted against the raging storm. For a heart-stopping second, Alara thought it was Lyra come to gloat. But the malice radiating from this shape was a far darker, colder thing. Unseen in the swirling snow, Lyra flattened herself against the rock face, her heart hammering with a toxic cocktail of terror and exhilaration. She had followed the Omega, driven by a petty desire to see her fail, to watch her freeze. She had seen the flicker of light from the cave and crept closer, expecting to find the girl trying to start a pathetic little fire. Instead, she had witnessed the impossible. She saw the wounded wolf. She saw the Omega touch it. She saw the blinding divine light, and she saw the wolf become the king. The king, Kale. And she had heard his words, mine, queen. That creature, that worthless, filthy Omega was the fated mate of the Alpha King, the future queen of all the packs. The unfairness of it was a physical blow, stealing her breath. It should have been her. She was beautiful, highborn, strong, not her. Jealousy, sharp and acidic, burned in her throat. But beneath it, something else sparked. An opportunity. She had heard the whispers, rumors of a rival power, a faction that called itself the Ember Covenant. They promised a new order, a world where strength was the only law and the weak were purged. They were said to be led by a Shadow King, one who sought to usurp Kale's throne. Lyra had dismissed it as seditious fantasy. Until now. She looked at the glowing mark on Alara's hand, saw the way the mighty king looked at the girl with utter adoration. That bond, it was his strength. But the girl herself was a weakness. She was untrained, terrified, and currently isolated with a king who was still recovering from a shadow magic attack. Lyra backed away from the cave, her mind racing. The Grey Fang pack would be useless. They would fall over themselves to worship their new queen. But the Covenant would see this not as a miracle, but as a vulnerability to be exploited. She could trade this information. She could give them the king's mate, and in return, they would give her the power and status she deserved. She would not be eclipsed by a ghost. She would rise on the Omega's ashes. With a new, venomous purpose, Lyra turned her back on the cave and fought her way back through the storm. She did not head for the Grey Fang compound. She headed for the old, ruined watchtower on the ridge, the secret meeting place she'd heard the malcontents whisper about. She had a bargain to make. Inside the cave, the moment of peace was shattered. Kale was on his feet in an instant, moving to place his massive frame between Alara and the entrance. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that promised violence. The figure at the cave mouth stepped inside. It was not one man, but three, all clad in black leather armor that seemed to absorb the light. Their faces were hidden by shadow-woven hoods, and they carried cruel-looking blades that pulsed with the same dark energy that had poisoned Kale. The king. one of them rasped, his voice like grinding stones. And he has found his little light. Malachor sends his regards, another said, and a request. He wants the girl. Kael's golden eyes narrowed to slits. You will not touch her. The leader of the trio laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You are still weak from the blade's kiss, old wolf. We can feel it. Give us the girl, and we will grant you a quick death. Alara's terror was a cold, solid weight in her stomach. These were the ones who had attacked him. They were here for her. Malachor. The name echoed in her mind, a harbinger of darkness. Get behind me, Kael ordered, his voice low and urgent. He did not look at her, his entire focus on the enemy. She scrambled backward, her injured ankle sending bolts of agony up her leg. She pressed herself against the far wall of the cave, trying to make herself small. Useless. She was completely and utterly useless. He was going to die protecting her. The thought was unbearable. The Covenant soldiers attacked. They moved with unnatural speed, a blur of black shadows and gleaming dark steel. Kael met them with a roar. He was a whirlwind of controlled fury, his fists and feet striking like hammers. He was magnificent, a god of battle. But the lead assassin was right. He was not at his full strength. His movements were a fraction too slow, his breaths coming a little too hard. He dispatched the first soldier with a brutal blow to the throat, but the other two pressed their advantage, their shadow blades weaving a deadly dance. One of them fainted high, and as Kael moved to block, the other lunged low. Alara saw it happen in slow motion, the black blade darting in under Kael's guard, aimed for his heart. No! She screamed. The soldier closest to her, the one whose comrade Kael had just killed, turned his attention to her. His shadowed face twisted into a cruel grin. Time to go, little light. He lunged. Alara threw her hands up to shield her face, a pathetic, instinctual gesture. She was going to die. But the soldier never reached her. Kael, with a guttural roar of pure rage, abandoned his own defense to intercept the attack. He threw himself in front of her, taking the soldier's weight, and snapped the man's neck with a savage twist. It cost him. The second assassin's blade, the one that had been aimed for his heart, instead plunged deep into his shoulder. Kael staggered back, a strangled cry of pain escaping his lips. His golden eyes flickered, dimming for a second. The assassin ripped his blade free and prepared for the killing blow. It was in that moment that Alara was captured. A third figure, one who had been hiding in the shadows of the cave mouth, moved with blinding speed. A rough sack was thrown over her head, plunging her into suffocating darkness. Strong arms lifted her as if she weighed nothing. She kicked and screamed, fighting with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. Kael! She heard his enraged roar, a sound of pure agony and fury, but it sounded distant, muffled. The arms holding her were like iron bands. They were dragging her out of the cave, back into the raging storm. Then, a new kind of pain exploded through her. Cold. A burning, soul-deep cold. Her captors snapped something metallic and heavy around her wrists. Silver. The cuffs were thick, engraved with dark runes that pulsed with a sickening energy. The moment the silver closed around her skin, the warm, humming connection to Kael was choked. It felt as if a vital part of her had been violently ripped away. The pain was excruciating, a psychic scream that echoed in the hollow space where the bond had been. On her hand, the sunburst mark flared with agonizing light before being forcibly dimmed, smothered by the silver's power. Through the dregs of the bond, she felt an echo of his pain. The silver that bound her was poison to him as well, severing their connection, weakening him when he needed his strength most. "Hold on," a faint, desperate whisper echoed in the ruins of her mind. His voice. "Hold on, I am coming." Then, nothing. The bond was gone, snuffed out like a candle flame. The cold that flooded the void was absolute. Despair, heavier and more profound than any she had ever known, crashed down on her. They had taken her, and in doing so, they had broken him. She was bundled onto a horse, the world a dizzying, terrifying lurch. The storm's howl was the only sound as they rode, leaving her king, her mate, wounded and alone in the darkness. The journey was a blur of misery. The suffocating sack over her head, the biting cold, the jarring motion of the horse, and the constant, gnawing agony from the silver cuffs. The emptiness where the bond had been was a physical wound, an ache in the center of her soul that was far worse than any broken bone. Hope had been dangled before her, a beautiful, impossible dream, only to be snatched away, leaving a reality more brutal than anything she had ever endured. She had no idea how long they traveled. Time lost all meaning. Finally, the motion stopped. She was dragged from the horse and hauled down what felt like an endless series of stone corridors. The air grew colder, damper, smelling of mold and old, deep darkness. The sack was ripped from her head. She blinked, her eyes struggling to adjust to the dim torchlight. She was in a vast, circular chamber, its walls made of glistening black obsidian. In the center of the room, runes were carved into the floor, glowing with a faint, sickly purple light. A ritual circle. Standing before her was a man who seemed to be forged from shadow and ambition. He was tall and lean, with pale skin and hair the color of ash. His eyes were the most chilling part of him. They were a flat, lifeless gray, like a winter sky devoid of sun. They held no warmth, only a calculating, predatory intelligence. This had to be Malachor, the Shadow King. He smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of his lips. "So, this is the little light that has the great Kale so distracted." His voice was smooth, cultured, but with an undercurrent of serpentine malice. He circled her slowly, his gray eyes examining her as if she were an interesting specimen, a tool to be studied. He stopped in front of her, his gaze falling to the silver cuffs that bound her hands. "Exquisite, are they not?" he mused. "Forged in the heart of a fallen star, quenched in the waters of the Shadowfen. They do not merely dampen magic, they sever connections. Every moment she wears them, your king grows weaker. The bond he shares with the land, the very source of his power, is now anchored to you. And you are anchored to my will." Alara stared at him, her heart a cold stone in her chest. So that was his plan, to use her, to use their bond, to destroy Kale from the inside out. She was the weapon aimed at the heart of the man who had called her his queen. "He will come for me," she said, her voice a raw, shaking whisper. Malachor's smile widened. "Oh, I am counting on it. But he will be a shadow of his former self. By the time he arrives, the ritual will be complete. I will use your light, the very essence of your soul, as a key to unlock his power and claim it for my own. The life force of the North will flow not into him, but into me. I will become a god, and he will become a memory." He reached out and tilted her chin up with one cold finger. His touch was reptilian, making her skin crawl. "Do not despair, little light. You have a great purpose to serve. You will be the mother of a new age, my age. Repulsion and a new unfamiliar anger warred with her despair. He spoke of her as if she were an object, a key, a vessel. He discounted her completely, just like Lyra, just like everyone. She pulled her chin away from his touch. "You will fail," she spat, the words tasting of defiance. Malachor laughed, a genuine chilling sound this time. "Such fire. I see what he sees in you. It will make your light burn all the brighter when I consume it." He turned and gestured to his guards. "Chain her in the center of the circle. The celestial alignment will be perfect at moonrise. Then, the real ceremony begins." The guards dragged her to the center of the room. Heavy, cold iron chains were fastened to the floor and then to the silver cuffs on her wrists. She was trapped, a sacrifice laid upon an altar of darkness. They left her there, alone in the vast echoing chamber. The despair she had held at bay came crashing back, a black and suffocating tide. She was alone. The bond was gone. Cale was wounded, weakened, and she was the cause. Malachor was right. She was nothing but a tool for Cale's destruction. Her one moment of worth, of connection, had become a curse that would destroy everything. She bowed her head, her hair falling around her face like a shroud. Tears streamed down her cheeks, cold trails of utter hopelessness. She had been a fool to believe, even for a second, that she could be anything more than what she was. A worthless, invisible thing, born only to bring ruin. Cale, she thought, the name a silent, broken prayer into the void. "I'm so sorry." As she sank to the lowest point of her life, a flicker. It was so faint she thought she'd imagined it. A tiny spark in the suffocating darkness of her mind. It was not the warm, strong river the bond had been. It was a single, desperate ember, fighting against an overwhelming gale. "Alara." His voice. It was faint, strained, filled with pain, but it was his. Hope, fragile and unbelievable, unfurled in her chest. He was still connected to her. The silver, the distance, it hadn't completely severed them. "Cale?" She projected back, pouring all of her focus, all of her desperate will into the thought. "Hold on," the voice came again, a little stronger this time, fueled by her response. "I feel you. Hold on, my light. I am coming." The tiny ember of connection flared, a beacon in her personal hell. He was alive. He was fighting. He was coming for her. It wasn't much. It was a whisper against a hurricane. But it was enough. Alara lifted her head. The tears on her face were not just of sorrow now, but of a new, furious resolve. Malachor thought she was a key, a passive object. He was wrong. She was not a key. She was a lock, and she would not be opened. Moonrise came. The sickly purple light of the runes on the floor intensified, casting eerie shadows that danced on the obsidian walls. Malachor returned, flanked by a dozen more of his shadow-robed acolytes. They formed a circle around her, their faces hidden in darkness, their chanting a low, guttural drone that vibrated in her bones. Malachor stood before her, holding a black crystal dagger. It seemed to drink the torchlight, a sliver of pure void. "The hour is upon us," he announced, his voice ringing with triumph. "The bond between the king and the land is frayed. His mate is our conduit. Her light will be the sacrifice that births a new dawn of shadow." He raised the dagger. Alara braced herself, focusing on the tiny, flickering connection to Cale. "Hold on. I am coming." The words were her mantra, her shield against the encroaching darkness. Just as Malachor began to bring the dagger down toward her chest, the entire fortress shook. A deafening roar, more animal than man, echoed from outside, a sound of pure, untamed rage. It was followed by the splintering crash of stone and metal. One of the massive obsidian walls of the chamber exploded inward, showering the room with razor-sharp shards. Through the dust and debris, a figure emerged, silhouetted against the pale moonlight. Chaol. He was no longer the wounded man from the cave. He was the Alpha King in his full, terrifying glory. His golden eyes blazed with wrathful fire, and his body was coiled with a lethal promise of violence. Behind him, his elite guard, the Silver Claws, poured into the room, their own shifts beginning, forms swelling and twisting into those of the massive direwolves she had only read about. Malachor! Chaol's voice was a tidal wave of fury, washing over the chamber. You will pay for touching what is mine. The battle was instant and absolute. The Silver Claws, now fully transformed, fell upon the acolytes with savage grace. Snarls, screams, and the clang of steel filled the air. It was chaos, a whirlwind of light and shadow, loyalty and treason. Malachor watched, his face a mask of cold fury. He is weaker than he appears, he snarled to his remaining guards. The bond is still suppressed. Kill him! He was right. Alara could feel it. Chaol was fighting with a ferocity that was breathtaking, but there was a hollowness to his power, a faint tremor in his stance. The silver cuffs she wore were still draining him, a constant open wound in his soul. Malachor ignored the battle raging around him, his focus entirely on the ritual. On her. A minor interruption, he hissed, turning back to her. We proceed. He lunged, the crystal dagger aimed for her heart. But Chaol was there. He moved like a golden blur, intercepting Malachor, his fist connecting with the Shadow King's jaw in a blow that cracked like a thunderclap. Malachor was thrown back, skidding across the ruined floor. The two kings faced each other, the eye of the storm. Your reign is over, old wolf, Malachor spat, wiping a trickle of black blood from his lip. He held up a new weapon, a long, thin blade forged of pure shadow, pulsing with a malevolence that made Alara's stomach clench. They clashed. It was a battle of gods. Chaol, a force of nature, of righteous fury and raw power. Malachor, a being of cold, precise malice, his shadow blade a blur of deadly strikes. Every time their weapons met, sparks of gold and purple erupted. Alara could only watch, chained and helpless. Her heart pounded with every blow Chaol took, every near miss. He was tiring. She could feel his strength waning, leached away by the silver that bound her. She was his anchor, but she was dragging him down into the abyss. Malachor saw it too. With a final, desperate feint, he created an opening. The shadow blade darted past Chaol's guard and plunged deep into his side, in the exact spot Alara's light had healed him before. Chaol cried out, a raw, agonized sound. His golden eyes flickered and dimmed. He staggered back, falling to one knee, his hand pressed against the smoking, corrupted wound. The sight of him falling, of his light dimming, broke something inside Alara. The despair, the fear, the helplessness, it all coalesced into a single titanic emotion. Rage. A white-hot, world-burning rage. This creature, this shadow, had hurt him. He had taken her hope, her mate, her king, and he was trying to extinguish him. He had called her nothing, a tool, a key. He was wrong.
No!
The word was not a scream. It was a physical force, a shockwave that blasted out from her. The silver cuffs on her wrists glowed cherry red. The dark runes sizzled, turning to smoke and ash. With a sound like shattering stars, the silver bands exploded outward, freeing her hands, and the bond, choked and suppressed, roared back to life. It was not a river. It was a tsunami. A torrent of power, of connection, of Kale's pain and her rage flooded her. But something else came with it. Her own power. The light. The light she had been told was a curse. The light she had hidden. The light she had feared. It erupted from her not as a flicker, but as a supernova. A wave of pure, blinding golden light exploded from her body. It was not a gentle, healing light. It was the light of pure, righteous fury. It slammed into the shadow acolytes, and they vaporized. Their screams cut short as they dissolved into motes of dust. The light washed over the obsidian walls, and they cracked, the dark magic woven into them shattering. The wave of power washed over Kael. The shadow blade in his side dissolved. The wound closed, leaving no scar. His golden eyes, which had dimmed to pale amber, flared back to their full, molten glory. He looked at her, not with shock, but with pure, unadulterated awe. Malachor had thrown up a shield of shadow, but the force of the blast had hurled him across the room. He struggled to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His shadow form was flickering, unstable. "What are you?" he shrieked, his composure finally broken. "You are nothing, an omega, a ghost!" Alara rose to her feet. The chains that had bound her fell away, melted into slag on the floor. The light did not recede. It clung to her, a radiant aura of golden power. Her simple, ragged clothes seemed to burn away, replaced by a gown of pure, woven starlight. It was too late. A focused, concentrated beam of pure, incandescent light shot from her palm. It was not a wave this time. It was a lance. It struck Malachor's flickering form dead center. There was no explosion, no sound. There was only a moment of absolute, impossible brightness. And then, nothing. Where the Shadow King had stood, there was only empty space. Not even ash remained. He was simply gone, erased from existence. The light around Alara slowly subsided, sinking back into her skin until only the glowing mark on her hand remained. The silence in the chamber was absolute, broken only by the panting of the victorious silver claws and the crackle of the few remaining torches. The battle was over. She stood there, trembling in the aftermath of the power that had surged through her. She felt hollowed out, yet more full than she had ever been. She looked at her hands, at the mark that now seemed like a part of her, and then she looked up at Cale. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't say a word. He simply reached for her, his large hands gentle on her arms, and pulled her against his chest. She collapsed against him, burying her face in the hard warmth of his body. The scent of pine and winter storms and him filled her senses. His arms wrapped around her, holding her so tightly she felt her broken pieces might just be pressed back together. She felt the steady, strong beat of his heart against her cheek. He was real. He was safe. "You saved me," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. She shook her head against his chest. "You saved me." He pulled back just enough to look down at her. His golden eyes were soft, filled with a love so profound it stole her breath. He gently took her hand, the one with the sunburst mark, and raised it to his lips. He pressed a soft, reverent kiss to the center of the design. "We saved each other," he corrected. He looked at her, at the remnants of starlight clinging to her, at the newfound strength in her eyes. "My queen." The title didn't feel strange anymore. It didn't feel like a mistake. It felt right. It felt like coming home. She had spent her entire life feeling worthless, invisible. But in his eyes, she was everything. She was a queen. She was his. A surge of feeling, bold and new, rose within her. This bond was not just something that had happened to her. It was something she could claim. It was hers as much as it was his. With a newfound confidence, she reached up with her marked hand and pressed it flat against his chest, directly over his heart. The moment her palm made contact, the sunburst mark blazed with a brilliant, warm light. The light flowed from her hand into him, a current of pure love and acceptance. And on his skin, beneath her hand, a new mark began to form. It was not a sunburst, but its perfect counterpart, a crescent moon, etched in lines of pure, shimmering silver, glowing in answer to her sun. Cale gasped, his eyes widening as he felt the bond lock into place. No longer a one-way discovery, but a mutual, two-way claiming. He looked down at the glowing moon over his heart, then back to her, his expression one of utter, soul-deep devotion. "Alara," he breathed her name, and for the first time she heard it not as the name of a ghost, but as the name of a woman loved beyond measure. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of frantic relief or desperate claiming. It was a kiss of promises, of forever. It was the sealing of a bond forged in fire and shadow, and the beginning of a life she never could have dreamed of. In his kiss, she found not just passion, but acceptance. Not just love, but belonging. When they finally broke apart, the world seemed to settle into a new alignment. The surviving Silverclaws had shifted back to their human forms and were kneeling, their heads bowed in deference to their king and to their new queen. Cale took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. The sun on her skin and the moon on his seemed to pulse with a gentle shared rhythm. He turned to lead her from the ruined fortress. As they stepped out of the darkness and into the clean, cold light of the moon, they found the rest of his forces assembled. Hundreds of warriors, the combined strength of the northern packs, stood waiting. A sea of grim, hopeful faces turned towards them. A hush fell over the crowd as they saw Cale, whole and powerful, and the woman at his side. They saw her ragged, starlit clothes, the exhaustion and strength on her face, and the undeniable light that seemed to emanate from her. Cale did not release her hand. He raised it high, for all to see. The sunburst mark on her skin glowed brightly in the moonlight, a beacon of defiance and power.
"Behold!"
Kale's voice boomed across the silent snowfields, filled with pride and reverence.
"The shadow is vanquished! The Ember Covenant is broken!"
He paused, his golden eyes sweeping over his people before returning to Alara's face.
"They called her a curse,"
he declared, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "But they were wrong. This is Alara, my mate, my queen. Her light did not curse your king. It was her light that saved him. It is her light that has saved us all." A moment of stunned silence, and then the clearing erupted. A single howl went up, then another, then hundreds, until the night was filled with a chorus of joyous, triumphant sound. The warriors raised their fists and their weapons, their cheers echoing off the mountains. They were not cheering for a king alone, they were cheering for their queen. Alara stood beside him, her hand in his, and let the sound wash over her. It was not the sound of mockery or contempt she was used to. It was a sound of acceptance, of reverence, of family. She looked from the sea of faces to the man beside her. His smile was just for her, a private sunrise in the midst of the celebration. He squeezed her hand, the silent gesture saying everything. "You are home. You are loved. You are mine." The cold no longer gnawed at her. It was just the crisp air of her new home. The aches were gone, replaced by a strength she was only just beginning to understand. And the feeling of being invisible? It was a distant memory, a ghost of a life that was no longer hers. She was Alara, the light of the north. She was a queen, and she was finally, truly seen. Leaning into Kale's warmth, surrounded by the sound of her people, she smiled, a real, genuine smile, and faced the dawn of her new life.